All right, we're starting up right now and we're getting things going, and I'm glad to be here. Glad to get stuff going for Live at Lunch once again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing with us. And let's get this thing rolling. This is about standing in the gap. This is more than just what we've been doing. This is simply showing us that we have come some distance as a ministry, but we haven't come that far as um, our development. And I'll say that in all honesty, we haven't come that far as our development into this launch, as far as linking up the Bible study, Live at Lunch Bible study, with the mobile ministry. And so this is part of that fusion that we're doing. This is part of that development in making that connection between our study and then our service. And so this is our attempt, in all honesty, to bring those pieces together. And so as we come back to this part about standing in the gap, this is part two of standing in the gap for the homeless, how we will help the homeless. And so please bear with me as we get through this and just look at Psalm 9. Psalm 9, where it talks about homelessness. And I really want us to understand that this is really God putting a perspective for us in this whole thing, um, about the needy, right? Those who are afflicted, and where there is hope. I think a lot of times we talk to people, we share with folks, and we don't see where there is hope and where there should be hope. And so in doing so, we lose some sense of where people are going and what people are doing. And what we really have to do is show and share that need for hope, right? And so this is Psalm 9:18, right? And I use the CEV version on the icons so we can see it. Talking specifically about homelessness. But when we see the NIV version and other versions, it doesn't necessarily speak to homelessness itself. And so this is what it says both in the CEV and the NIV. The poor and homeless won't always be forgotten and without hope. That's the contemporary English version. But God will never forget the needy. The hope of the afflicted will never perish. That is the same Psalm verse in the NIV. And what that's showing us is, one, it's showing us that there is hope. And I think that if we work diligently, we won't afford or allow those who are experiencing troubles to feel as though they have no hope. And that's part of where we stand in the gap. And then the other part is, how do we uplift? How do we encourage? How do we, edify? How do we build up people who are experiencing troubles and help them move on to other levels in life to where they can not just experience hope, but also get help, right? And so hope and help are tied in together in standing in the gap. And so look at this. I just summarized it here. Um, there is a concern on God's heart for the poor. You can read it throughout the Psalms. You can read it throughout Proverbs. You can read it throughout what's dictated as commands in the Old Testament, which were given to the children of Israel as they were entering into the new land, the promised land, about how they should handle the foreigner, how they should handle the poor and the needy. What was the point of the offering? That was for those who didn't have what those who had had. You know what I'm saying? The haves and the have-nots. That's what that was about. So the point of the tithe was for the poor and needy and the Levites, the widows and orphans and the Levites and the strangers, the foreigners. The gleanings were for the foreigners, the strangers, the wanderers, all, as well as the poor and the needy. All of these things which were attributed to this establishment of the children of Israel in the promised land led to what was supposed to be the treatment of other people who could not have the same social or economic standing that they had. And so vein, in that vein, the idea that the poor and needy are not forgotten by God and that the afflicted still have hope, right? To the very end, forever and ever, no matter what the conditions are, they still have hope because of where God has them in his heart. And so that's something that's heavy on my heart. That's something that's heavy on my heart. And what it looks like for me when I deal with ministry. And I say that in all honesty because as I deal with ministry, I struggle like anyone else. You know what I mean? I struggle like anyone else. And I struggle to see some of the connections. I struggle to see some of the things that other folks see. And when I look at this and see where my own ministry has, struggled, right? I look at this and see where my own ministry has had troubles. And in doing so, that's why I'm doing some of the work that I'm trying to do within San Diego regarding homelessness. If you take some time, like I presented before, Words from the Underground, we've got a download or donate campaign. That's just simple. You can download the book or donate to the GoFundMe program. You can check it out here. I'll put it in the comments as far as where you can check out the books that I have for National Poetry Month at a special price. And we also have, those are the ebooks. And we also have our own, right? We also have our own set of GoFundMe programming that we're doing. And that GoFundMe program is really set to deal with part of what we're doing and trying to launch every first Saturday in San Diego for standing in the gap by really being there on the streets, starting by feeding people and then by fighting poverty. Everything doesn't have to be on a monumental scale. And that's where I think sometimes we fail in ministry. We think it has to be this monstrous thing, and it all doesn't have to be that way. And so that's part of where I see things going awry. And so take this into account, right? This is the statistics for homelessness in California, right? And when we look at this, California has, a large disproportionate share of homelessness in California when we look at it from a national scope, right? And even though we are 12% of the population of the United States, we still account for 20%, over 20% of California, of the nation's homeless, just here in California. Throw in too that 25% of those experiencing homelessness in California are in San Diego City and County, according to 2012 data. If we look at San Diego data, those numbers have increased, and those numbers continue to increase since that time. So we look at San Diego's homeless count. There are no less than 8,427 individuals experiencing homelessness across San Diego County, which is still a 10% increase from the count which was in 2020. And so, like I said, the numbers are growing for homelessness. Some of the challenges with homelessness, people are in cars, they're in canyons, they're under bridges, right? If you look throughout the city of San Diego, you'll see numerous tents that people have been supplied with that occupy the streets. That's a very temporary fix. That's a very temporary fix, giving people tents and sleeping bags. Um, and so there are efforts being made to find as many people as possible through this homeless count that's done by the Regional Task Force on Homelessness in San Diego. These numbers also include 4,106 unsheltered San Diegans with 4,321 individuals in shelters. So just over half of the people who are considered homeless by this count are already in shelters. But remember, shelters have different phases. Some you can stay in for an extended period of time, some are very short term stays. And so they might have been in a shelter at the time of the account, which was December, but now how are they accounted for since there have been changes since December? That's part of the issue. Of those surveyed, 85% said they had fallen into homelessness in our region. That means 15% of people transition into San Diego as homeless. The others, their homelessness occurred while in San Diego. And so that's what we're looking at as far as ministry. Go back to what the Lord said. There's still hope. There's still hope. Are we that hope? Are we the ones to stand in the gap? Because you're still talking about over 8,000 people. This is a table I came up with that deals with some of the issues as far as services with homelessness. This is from the Downtown Partnership, Downtown San Diego Partnership. They're a nonprofit here in San Diego. They do some of the accounting of information within San Diego. Here's just a snapshot of homeless services in San Diego so you can get a glimpse of how things are doled out. And I'll walk through this just so you can have a better understanding. There's a study by the Downtown Partnership that showed 1,839 people living without shelter in the downtown area, whether they be in cars or on the sidewalk. So go back to those who were experiencing homelessness as unsheltered. That's 4,106. Of those 4,106, 1,800, over 1,800 of them are in downtown San Diego. So that's a prime area for homelessness. That doesn't mean that's the only area in San Diego or San Diego County where unsheltered, unhoused individuals are staying. That's just where a greater concentration of them are. So 1,800 of the 4,100 are in downtown San Diego, and they're unsheltered. Then you look at it, San Diego has the fifth largest homeless population, right? They're the fifth largest homeless population in California, right? And they have 5% of the state's homeless population. So those numbers, right? Those numbers that I provided before match up with San Diego being ranked as the fifth largest homeless population in the state of California. And the most often recommended resource in San Diego for assessing homeless situations and housing needs would be 211 San Diego. 90% of the time, people are referred to through 211 San Diego. I think 211 is a good resource. I've um, I've gone through numerous trainings with them based upon programs that I've been involved with as far as health, CalFresh outreach, as well as hunger, homelessness, and shelters are part of uh, the information that they provide. But the information is only good as its source. And so 211 San Diego itself can't be blamed for a lot of the resources that are not adequate and accurate for supporting the homeless. And they're just a directory, a composite of services. They're like a catch-all, and you can build from there. But that's what they primarily are. And so when we look at this, here we go. This is part of what we have to understand. The shelters themselves. There are 2,040 shelters in San Diego County. The intake process is based on availability. There's also other criteria people use. Um, I know it says registered sex offenders are ineligible, but the actual information says lifetime registered sex offenders are ineligible. And so that can get misconstrued as well. But each have different populations they serve. Some are women and children's shelters, some are family shelters, some are for just men and women individually, they're not for couples. Some accommodate pets, some don't accommodate pets. That's all shelters have different criteria that they use, and so it all depends on what pocket of the population you're in. One thing I will say about shelters where I think we are failing people is that we are failing people in the sense of um, priority and urgency. What's emergency status? Where we're failing people as far as priority is that we're failing people who are disabled, who are elderly, who are suffering from numerous other conditions that contribute to them being homeless. And we just have to get down and drill down a little bit more into how the shelter space is doled out. One of the most popular shelters in San Diego is Father Joe's Villages. They serve men and women. They have 350 beds. It's usually through walk-in where you set an appointment, and their website is listed there. There's also temporary housing available. FindHelp.org lists 62 short-term housing programs in San Diego, just in the 92154 zip code. Most have two ways of getting into the program, either calling, right? Either calling a listed number or applying online. One of the biggest programs is Housing First San Diego. It's based on a model to provide unhoused people with housing as quickly as possible with supported services as needed. And so most of these have an extensive process by which to acquire the housing. So you need housing in the meantime of getting the temporary housing. And so temporary housing is what we would consider an intermediate intervention. It's not permanent, but it is something that gives you a little more freedom, a little more access, more space, right? You can be in temporary housing and still only have half a room because you're sharing a room with someone, or you may have your own room. It may be more of a studio environment. It all depends on the structure of the housing program. So those require an extensive wait period. They also have a process as far as documentation. You have to have your paperwork together. And so a lot of these programs will work with you in order to get your paperwork in order, but they're not necessarily guarantees. Okay. And so that's shelters, temporary housing. Then we got this thing called permanent housing. Here's where we start to really fall off is that permanent housing, there's 10 programs. 10. The number of households assisted has steadily declined since 2019. Guess what else happened in 2019, right? And so you would think with COVID coming in, we would increase permanent housing solutions for people. That's not what's happening in San Diego. It's actually started a decline in permanent housing for people. The claim to fame right now is that for 2023, we're already at 239 households that have been housed. We'll say households, individuals, families, couples, right? Women with children, husbands and wives with children, families, right? However you want to determine households by this data, 239 of them have been housed by these 10 programs so far in 2023. So let's just break that down. The average program is housing 24 folks, 23.9. That's what the average program is housing as far as permanent housing. Most popular program is the Rapid Rehousing Program, and that helps individuals and families experiencing homelessness to quickly obtain and maintain permanent housing. I'm very careful to make sure that the quickly portion is a direct quote from their information, because that's all about perspective. And when there's only 10 programs in existence, and we go back to the numbers of individuals who are not sheltered, who are in shelters, who are experiencing homelessness, and we're talking about 8,000 plus folks, right? I don't see a limited number of programs and a minimal number of folks assisted. I don't see that as a quick process. I think that's a extensive and potentially grueling process. And so when I share this with the understanding that part of what we're talking about is how God deals with God's folks, right? How God deals with his people, how God deals with us. And so next week, I really want to get into how we deal with God offering these folks hope, how God deals with our position in standing in the gap, how God deals with what we're supposed to do. I really find it difficult to sit up here, go through the Bible. We're talking about Psalms, but then we look at the Bible and we seek inspiration, but let's not seek inspiration without seeking to leave an impact. Let's not seek inspiration as we look in the Bible and we overlook and look beyond, look past, look over the human condition around us. And I say that because the human condition around us isn't always a glorified state of being for people. And so, yes, it's amazing that we can go and quote the Lord. We can quote the text, even in a psalm just prior to this. You know, what is man that God is mindful of him? He's made them a little lower than the angels. The consideration of God for man is there. And so if that's part of it, and we're supposed to also be loving our neighbors, then we'll definitely be a little more infused to stand in the gap, if I might say. We definitely will be a little more inspired to have compassion on our neighbor, to love our neighbor as ourselves, we definitely would be able to put forth more effort into saying, you know what, God is God for real, and God is God who is standing here sharing with me and causing me to see, you know what, it's by his grace that I'm not in that position. And so let me show some compassion for someone who is in that position. The Bible even tells us not just to give hope to those who are experiencing homelessness, those who are dealing with poverty, those who are afflicted, but it also says for us to lend our voice to that. Go to Proverbs 31. It says we should lend our voice to speak up and seek justice for those who are afflicted, those who are oppressed. And so, if those are the things that we're called to do, right? If those are the things that we're called to do, and then you turn the pages into the New Testament, and the Son of Man came to serve, right? The Son of Man came to serve and not be served. That's Mark 10:45, right? And he quoted Isaiah 61 that he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to do what? To preach, to share this, to set the captives free, to bring liberty, right? To preach the good news to the poor." All of these things, right, that he was supposed to do. And then they wanted to stone him and run him out of the church. What are we supposed to do as Christians if we're followers of Christ? And he's the manifestation of the word as the Messiah. We go back to John chapter 1. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God, right? If we go back to that and we see who he was on earth and who he is at the right hand of the Father, then what are we doing when we see our brothers or sisters in need? What are we doing when we bypass the human condition and say, well, you know what, the government will take care of that? I'm reading a book right now on the Christian perspective of money and greed, and there's just a lot of views on the government's role. But keep in mind, FDR didn't introduce anything new that the church hadn't been doing for generations. And so when FDR entered and created this new deal with welfare and all of these things, and the government began to step in and take care of people in order to give some relief from the depression, now you've created something else, and the church actually has stepped back more hands off rather than stepping forward and continuing with its benevolence, continuing with creating hospitals, continuing with orphanages, continuing with care for widows, orphans, the poor, and the needy. And so let's get back to that. Let's get back to the basics. Let's get back to what God called us to do and truly love our neighbor. Owe no man nothing but the debt of love. Let's free ourselves of all this other stuff and get back to that. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about help for the homeless and what this really means. And part of us being a help is giving them hope. And another part of us being a help is lending a hand. Hey, I really hope that you got something from this. Look at the stats that I shared. Look at the data that I shared. I'll definitely be sure to offer some more at a later point. But we're going to be talking about being a blessing. We're going to be talking about being a blessing as we go into next week. Hey, thank you. Appreciate you. God bless. God be with you. Godspeed.